Get a record, get them out. Now.
Want to let you know that I got a brand new guest who's joining in on the conversation. Tom Ruskin is a private investigator, a former NYPD detective. He knows the drill. He's been there. He's been on the scenes of these crimes and homicides and suicides as well, Tom.
Right.
You've been at them all.
That's right.
Okay. Do you know, as an instinctive cop, when you get on a scene and somebody says somebody killed themselves, do you know right away if it's a suicide?
No.
Why not?
Because it takes investigation. Sometimes it's very clear that it seems very obvious that they may have killed themselves. But you don't know until you do the forensics and you do the examination, you speak to possible witnesses, you find out if they're hanging there and a chair is not over.
Well, you know what? Good that you said that, because there was a case actually here in New York of that the woman who was the film writer who wrote, I believe, the movie called The Waitress.
That's right.
Who was found hanging, I believe, in her bathtub.
Right.
And that was a murder.
Right.
That would have looked right away like a hanging.
Sometimes what looks like a suicide when you get there turns out to be a murder. I remember responding to a case where a guy had died. We thought it was a heart attack. Not until the ME came back that he'd been stabbed underneath the arm with a small little ice pick did we then have to go back and look at it as a crime scene.
Was there no blood?
No blood.
What?
All the blood, because it was an ice pick and it was a small puncture wound, the blood was internal. So until the ME actually opened the body up to do the forensics, didn't we know that it was, and the crime scene was compromised because we treated it as, you know, as a heart attack.
Yeah, well,
we thought at the time,
heart attack, right.
And he did have a heart condition, but that's not what killed him.
So this sounds like a KGB murder. Somebody who somebody had to know that that ice pick and that hidden location wouldn't create a pool of blood and would look like a heart attack.
Well, what we found out later is two guys had had a fight. The only thing that was there was an ice pick, and it was taken.
Wow. And here I am giving all these ideas out to people in TV land. Don't. Okay, so compromise. That I'm glad you brought that up, because that's an issue here. Correct. You respond to a suicide. What's your training tell you to do? Don't think right away it's a suicide, folks. You know, treat this as a crime scene, or get in there as fast as possible, try and save this person if he or she's not dead yet.
Well, if the person's not dead, of course you're trying to save the victim of whatever's happened there, and you remove them to a hospital. And then you try and recreate the scene in which you came to at the time that you responded to this call. But anytime you're responding, you don't have any preconceived notion of what happened. You look at it as you come in as a detective or as a cop, as I'm coming upon a new scene and I don't know what I'm going to...
Oh, so is your MO a little bit different? Like, should you respond to a scene of an emergency, regardless of what the 911 call told you? For instance, a 911 call could come in, there's been a shooting, I think my neighbor's dead.
Correct.
Okay. The 911 call could be Larry's. My wife just shot herself. Suicide. Or something of a variant degree. Are you responding the same to all of them?
Well, to a gunshot, you're responding with the caution that there could be an active shooter there.
Right.
So you're responding, but once you're there and the scene is basically secure, at that point in time, if someone can be removed to a hospital to try and render them medical aid, you do that. But after that, you're preserving the crime scene.
So it kind of sounds to me like that's a bogus argument for a defense attorney in this particular case. If he's going to make the case, police walked all over the scene. They did things according to a suicide. This is no murder. That sounds like a bit of a bogus argument, because cops will respond that it could be anything.
Well, it depends on the police department, how often they see this. So if it's a bigger department like New York City, you see it more often.
Okay.
If it's a smaller department where they don't have these type of crimes that often, they would respond. Yeah, Memphis is a big police department.
Okay, so what are the excuses for the crap that went on in this case?
Honestly, it was police error. I mean, there were a lot of things that I would have recommended to them that they do differently. One, taping the interview. Why aren't they taping an interview of a possible defendant?
Oh, please, are you kidding me? Do you know how many times we get on the airwaves and we hear this crap?
But that's a fatal flaw, because it can work for you in many, many cases.
And how about the tapes they do actually use with equipment from 1971? Right. So you do get the tape, it's awful, and then you don't know what to make of it, and it could actually work in the defendant's favor, because he seems like there's remorse there, when in fact there was none, because the tape is so bad.
Or if the tape equipment is that old that it stops at times, they say, why did the police shut it off? Well, the police may not shut it off. It may have been faulty equipment.
And you know how I feel about facial expressions, etc. I mean, the eyes tell a million stories, and when your video is so grainy, you can't even see the guy's face. You get the audio, but you don't get the guy rolling his eyes saying, yeah, she committed suicide, whatever. Huge, huge communication issues. Hold your thoughts for a moment. I got a million other questions because I know you've also got some thoughts about responding to all the suicides that you have and how many of them were African-American women. That's coming up in a minute. As we go to break, though, we want to update you on today's 13th juror question for the day. Our question is this: does the DNA evidence in this case help the defense? And so far, 74% of you are voting yes, but 26% of you not so sure about that. So if you want to move those numbers around, you just log on to cnn.com/crime. Ignore my grumbling stomach if you can hear it. I know I can, which makes me think my microphone can. It's early. It's early. It's breakfast time for most people. 13th juror question, get in on it. Back after this. 10 days, but 60 of them were in a mental health facility. So Tom Ruskin, that leads me to the question of the investigator of the bunch, and that'd be you with your former NYPD experience. What kind of evidence would lead, in these particular 3 cases, a jury to decide one way for one case and entirely a different way, like Clara Harris, basically, 20 years in the slammer. What are the different kinds of evidence that you'd have to come up with for a jury to give someone such a break?
The juries are human beings. They're called in, they're sitting there, they're listening to this evidence, and they feel for the defendant at times. In a Winkler case, they're looking at it and they're saying she's been beaten. There's evidence that she was beaten repeatedly, time and time again. In this case, I think the jury's going to hear the testimony and they're going to feel this woman was beaten time and time again, and her murder may have been the culmination of that beating. Right. And that may have been the final thing. Whereas in the Harris case, where you have her running around in a circle and running down her husband repeatedly on tape and then claiming she was in a fog, you can't really embrace that defendant.
I mean, that's the evidence that really kills her, isn't it? Just that videotape alone.
That videotape alone.
It wasn't just once.
No, yeah. She went around and around and around, and she kept running his body over, and she didn't stop. So it's very difficult to feel for that defendant. And a lot of times, juries where they're given different counts that they can find the person guilty will not find them on the top count. They'll find them on a lesser count, which gives them less jail time. When
you respond to these cases, and I know you've done a lot of them, do you get sort of personal? Do you sort of think, my God, did this victim have it bad? Did you sort of get angry at the perpetrator, or at the alleged perpetrator, because obviously it's an alleged when you're involved in the case. Right. Do you just sort of get mad because you see so much garbage that you really wish you hadn't seen?
A lot of times, not only do you feel angry inside of yourself, you don't let that come out. But what you do is, if you're a patrol cop and you've been to this house numerous times, and let's say based on the law your hands have been tied, let's say you've even arrested the man or the woman before on domestic violence complaints, and they're back in the house at times when you removed them. Yeah. In this present case, she had been